Friends, do you happen to know what homoglobo is? Such a term as homoglobo. I also wasn't aware until today, but I listened to Tucker Carlson, that particular journalist who is in opposition to everything conventional and normal within the United States of America. So he claims that homoglobo is Donald Trump's primary target, as well as that of the entire American administration globally. And he's saying this in the context of what's happening around Venezuela. In short, Tucker Carlson claims to have unraveled the intentions of the United States of America. Why are these certain boats being drawn to the shores of Venezuela? Why is the American military grouping already 12,000 strong, and why are an additional 4,000 to be added? And why are media outlets, particularly NBC News, reporting that a blatant ground operation by the United States Armed Forces is being prepared to seize power in Venezuela? And according to Tucker Carlson, all of this is being disguised as a fight against drug trafficking and drug cartels. So this is Tucker Carlson's take on the situation, right? Maduro needs to be removed from the leadership of that nation, Venezuela, simply because he opposes same-sex unions, abortion rights, and gender-affirming procedures. And the successor being groomed for him consequently champions these exact values that Tucker Carlson labels as homoglobo. There is also another perspective, another take from this year's Nobel laureate, a person of whom Donald Trump is incredibly envious. Her name, I'll remind you, is Karen Machado. She's Venezuelan and she received the Nobel Peace Prize from the Nobel Committee. And she is an opposition politician, an activist, and so on and so forth, who is not currently residing in Venezuela. You know, some people say, oh, that Venezuelan Machado is great, we should help her, let her fight. But I tell them she's not even in Venezuela. And here's the strange thing, especially among Ukrainians. How is she fighting if she's not in Venezuela? Well, something like Belarus's Chikanuskaya, I suppose. So this Karen Machado, just think about it, she is a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, right? And today she is openly advocating for military escalation. And she claims that only through military escalation, yes, escalation is the only way to remove Maduro. This implies that only through military escalation can Maduro be removed from power. And then we can delve into discussions about democracy, specifically regarding the 100,000 people poised to protest, prepared to champion a democratic and non-violent change of power, and all that it entails. Thus, Donald Trump, who also desires, at least in the very near future, to receive the Nobel Peace Prize next time around, needs to assist in removing Maduro. And that, in fact, is exactly what Donald Trump is doing. Friends, this is also quite a naive story from yet another Latin American, right? Tucker Carlson is an American, a classic citizen of America, that is. Machado is a Latin American woman. And it seems to me that the most crucial aspect of this whole situation right now is the absolutely military escalation and the, by the way, quite probable threat of an open military conflict between the United States and Venezuela. So it seems to me that Ukrainians are the closest to all of this at the moment. We have Yehor Cherniev, who is a member of the Defense Committee and a person who is essential to our cooperation. I mean, Ukraine's cooperation with the North Atlantic Alliance and by extension with the Americans. He wrote quite a lengthy post this morning. I'd like to extend my thanks to Yehor. So what does he write? That the US will continue to help us in the Ukrainian context with intelligence and sell us weapons through the PURL program. But for Trump right now, friends, the issue of oil is becoming a priority, or more precisely, certain oil suppliers. It is primarily about Venezuela, a nation that holds the world's largest oil reserves. Nigeria, which is Africa's largest supplier and an OPEC member. Mexico, a nation ranking among the top 15 oil-producing countries, and also Colombia. So you understand, right? This now appears to be much closer to the truth. Why is the interest of the United States, and specifically that of Donald Trump, currently shifting focus to Latin America, as a matter of fact? And all these peculiar stories about Nigerian Christians that need to be protected, and we even have permission for it. You know, I actually did find this news story, by the way. Indeed, it's true. A ground operation in Mexico is actually being prepared right now, officially being worked on and developed by the Central Intelligence Agency, US Special Forces, and the Department of Defense, which is the Pentagon. a ground operation on Mexican territory to fight the cartels. This sparks significant skepticism because truly, what sovereign nation would ever permit a sanctioned military operation within its own borders, similar to Putin's special military operation in Ukraine? Can you truly picture such a scenario? Yet NBC News is openly reporting on this matter. Next, I also want to read you a bit more about the rationale that Tucker Carlson adheres to. Yehor Cherniev, our member of parliament. So how exactly does he phrase it? That the United States is currently threatening each of these countries, Nigeria, Colombia, Mexico, and Venezuela, with war or a special military operation. This might not even happen because the goal is simply to intimidate these nations and restore the US position in the Western Hemisphere, as well as to gain influence over these countries' decisions in the energy sector, primarily concerning oil trade. In other words, Trump wants to significantly increase global oil production to lower prices and kick Russia out of the market without hurting the world economy. This is the ace Trump wants to have up his sleeve before the next round of negotiations with Putin. And for now, he'll watch as the Russian budget and economy continue to fall after the implementation of sanctions against ROSNEFT and LUKOIL. And when the client, in quotes, becomes ripe for it, he will approach them with a new agreement and much stricter terms. Unfortunately, complex and major issues aren't solved as quickly as we'd like just because someone wishes it. It takes a long time, so Trump will have to work on it. And our task is to hold out with minimal losses of people and territory, so as not to let Putin strengthen his negotiating position before the next meeting with him. If all this is true, if it fits into the logic that Trump is trying to increase oil production, then in principle the sanctions policy is indeed working. You know that OPEC+, whose membership includes some of the nations that Yehor Cherniev enumerated, they are currently decreasing production in order to maintain this price cap for oil, the global barrel price, at the level of $65. So this is already taking place now. If this pressure or the intent to extract oil to capture these reserves around them with the assistance of the armed forces of Russia, the United States of America, proves successful, then this whole situation will turns into, a storm in a teacup in a way. But imagine a military intervention on the territory of Venezuela. Now try to picture the Russian Federation's interests within the territory of Venezuela. And just imagine the depth of Maduro's current reliance, his hopes now, specifically placed on Putin. Friends, this is more than just a storm in a teacup, as I might have put it. This is truly the threat of another Syria, a genuine threat of another Syria. A war over resources could potentially undermine the economic, authoritarian, and totalitarian governments of nations such as the Russian Federation, China, and Iran. Everything categorized as the global south isn't primarily aimed at the Chinese and the Iranians. China is now saving up oil. 1.2 billion barrels are already in storage, and there will be more, so the Chinese are hedging their bets, but the Russian Federation is another matter. And if this logic with which I began is indeed true, then it becomes quite simple to explain these events that took place over the weekend and continue to unfold now. What is it that we are observing here? We see a Russian Il-76 plane landed in Caracas, Venezuela. It belongs to the company that once transported Wagner mercenaries. The plane has a capacity of up to 200 people, and it's quite possible that an official request was made at Maduro's insistence. This is not a secret at all. A request was sent to the Russian Federation, Iran, and China for military assistance. This assistance includes offensive drones, missile systems, and ultimately personnel and radar equipment. And also, engineers will be there to service the military equipment that the Venezuelan army has in its arsenal. What could the Il-76 have possibly transported, given it so persistently navigated this air corridor all the way to Venezuela? You won't believe this, but to fly from the Russian Federation to Venezuela, that plane spent its crew. What exactly were they carrying? More than 2 days. More than 2 days. Why? Because they circumvented all risky territories to avoid sanctions, being detained, unnecessary checks, and so on and so forth. Armenia, Algeria, Morocco, Senegal, Mauritania, then Caracas, Venezuela. Can you imagine? This route transporting 50 tons of cargo, perhaps 200 individuals, who knows what exactly, but it might contain outright weapons. Now, let's discuss the weaponry that requires maintenance in Venezuela. Venezuela actually possesses submarines, my friends. It possesses, both Igla missiles, and most likely it will also be equipped with some Kinjal missiles, those cruise missiles. And today, in the Defense Committee of the Russian Federation, a story was heard to the effect that, in principle, this was stated by Zhuravlyov, the deputy head of the State Duma's Defense Committee of the Russian Federation, stated that Russia is actually contemplating the idea of sending the Oreshnik missile and Kinjal missiles and other similar systems to Venezuela. And in the opinion of this Zhuravlyov, and according to his logic, this would not contradict any international agreements whatsoever, because Venezuela, as Zhuravlyov simply recognizes, is already quite actively saturated with Russian weaponry. All the weaponry that Venezuela possesses, every single piece of it, is of Russian origin. I don't know about the submarines for sure, but it's entirely possible that submarines are also a part of it. So this will be a very complicated situation if it all kicks off and the planes are arriving and statements about the Oreshnik missiles are already being made, meaning some things are already happening. So here it is, by the way, this Oreshnik missile, what it could look like. I don't know how they would transport it, whether an IL-76 can handle it or not, but that's the scenario we're facing, isn't it? What's coming soon, this news, friends, from October 31st signifies that American mass media outlets are reporting on the possibility that there might a strike could be launched against the air infrastructure and seaports, airports and seaports by the United States in the next few days. No one can say with certainty, but this small detail, that the airspace over Puerto Rico was closed until March 2026, well, it speaks to the possibility that the United States is still considering and deliberating, thinking and weighing its decisions. Now, Putin and everyone else involved really need to start thinking. And when Donald Trump weighs his options, Russia in turn pulls Oreshnik missiles out of its sleeve. Today they did just that. The situation is in fact more than serious. It is critical.